Hello and welcome to Big Baseball and Beyond. We are your hosts for this Midwest-based D1 baseball podcast. He is Burke Granger. I am Patrick Ebert. We're going to take you through the next, 30, 40. I'm not going to tease you with 180 because we're not going to do that. We'll tell you that up front. We're going to jump right into the mix today and try to share some of our observations. Burke was at Ohio State versus Oregon State last weekend. I was at UCLA at Purdue, and I also stopped by to see Florida State at Notre Dame, because anytime you have a chance to see a potential number one overall draft pick in Florida State left-hander Jamie Arnold,
got to do it.
You got to do it. And actually, I got to give Burke thanks for that, because his response, I just kind of picked his brain. Hey, what should I do? And he told me what he'd do, and I decided to follow suit. So for that, Burke, thank you.
I have top prospect radar that once I know they're coming to the Midwest, bells and whistles go off. And even I knew I wasn't going to be able to go to that game to see Jamie Arnold, but you going is the next best thing. And you got some great video that I was able to watch on Twitter.
Yeah. I'll just share with you. It's funny because I rented a car from the Milwaukee airport, which is about 20, 30 minutes for me. I forgot my radar gun. I didn't realize that until I got to the airport. So I had to run home, and then I had to run back. By the time I ran back, I hit a pretty significant traffic slowdown before the Milwaukee airport. And then I had to drive through Chicago to get to Notre Dame. And yet I still walked in before the game started. I gave myself 90 minutes, when I initially left my house. And I gave myself 90 minutes. It turned out to be okay. I walked up front row, was able to get that video that you mentioned. And but of course, driving the 3.5-hour drive, whatever it was, I was a little more stressed in that ride than I wanted to be. So
just you telling about it stressed me out. So like that, those are the types of things that give me heartburn. Because I, like you, I always try to give myself a cushion, but when things beyond my control, or this case was solely in your control for getting your radar gun, you just got to plan for things to go wrong, and you still made it. You missed batting practice. I'm not going to ding you too much for that, but you made it in time for the national anthem, and then you saw a first round pitch. So that's nothing to be ashamed about.
Yeah, and I saw Estevan Moreno good, who I hadn't seen when I saw Notre Dame earlier in the season. So that was also a plus. But I'll get into that in a little bit here. Wanted to kick off our show. We're obviously, the big part of our branded show is for the Big Ten. You can see if you're watching us on YouTube or whatever, you've seen the logo. Big is spelled B1G to represent the Big Ten. But we cover all Midwest baseball. We have not hit on much on this program other than Big Ten baseball, simply because like those conferences, like the MAC, Missouri Valley Conference, the Summit, the Horizon. I'd say through this part of the season, like there haven't been a whole lot of standouts. I mean, you have Southern Illinois in the Missouri Valley. You got Bowling Green, Miami's doing some good things, and Ball State in the MAC. The Horizon League is usually Wright State's conference that they take care of pretty good. In the Summit League, you have St. Thomas up in St. Paul that's having a pretty decent year over in the Summit, but not a lot to talk about at this point in time. We're not like just passively ignoring those conferences. We plan to get to them at some point. I don't think we're ready for that yet. We want to wait for those seasons to get a little deeper before we hit on those. But I promise you, Burke promises you that we will.
There is the big series in the MAC this weekend is Miami of Ohio at Bowling Green. I think they're both 10-2, tied atop the conference, or Ball State might be bunched up there with them. But Miami of Ohio I think they're only 500 overall record wise, but Evan Applewhite, the Indiana transfer, is having Applewick is having a huge year for them. I think he's got 12 or 13 home runs. And then Bowling Green is doing great things again. Like last year was kind of a Cinderella story, and they're doing it in large part without DJ Newman. He didn't pitch the first few weeks, and then I noticed he only went two innings the week before last, and then didn't throw last weekend. So not sure, haven't had a chance to inquire what's going on there, but offensively they're a really good team. And Bowling Green they're a constant. They're always good. So I'm looking forward to my first looks at those teams in particular.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was saying the Missouri Valley, there's a similar, like, really good conference series this coming weekend where Missouri State is at Southern Illinois, and that's a series in particular. That's the first big one in the Valley. So looking
Yeah.
forward to seeing that. So, but getting that out of the way, turning our attention back to the Big Ten. Before we share our observations, figure we do a quick look at what happened this past weekend. And Burke, I find it interesting. A few weeks ago, we kind of challenged Indiana on our podcast, specifically speaking to their pitching. And ever since we brought that up, their pitching has been a lot different. They've actually found some pieces in how they want to use them and have success with some of those pieces. But last week we challenged Nebraska in the same, just based on the start that they've had. Now they did not play a Big Ten series. They hosted Oregon State for 3 games, and they won that series. And they did it. They won game 3. They had a 9-run 7th inning, and I want to say, I don't know if it was all 9 of those runs, but a bunch of them came with 2 outs. So they put together this incredible rally. They end up winning that game 16-7 or something like that, and they win the series against Oregon State. So you wonder, is that kind of what they needed to get going? It was their offense and not their pitching staff that was a little more dormant prior to that series, and it looks like they've maybe found a little more hot hitting ways. And if that's the case, the rest of the Big Ten should be put on notice.
Yeah, and then we talked about them last week of having this daunting task of playing Oregon State, and I think we were speculating, hey, if they can win 1 out of 3 of those games, or 1 out of 3 of those games, and then head into this coming weekend with Rutgers, that's a chance to kind of right the ship. So the bad news is those 2 wins don't count as conference wins for the Cornhuskers, but the good news is you beat a quality opponent on the road. I think was it on the road or at home? I forget. But you beat a quality opponent, and then now you got they'll be favored in the Rutgers series, and then a chance to kind of get right. So they've been on life support. You called them the Texas A&M of the North, but they're still hanging in there. So and as we've talked, they have that pitching depth that if they can just get into that Big Ten tournament, then they're essentially playing a home series there, and who knows what could happen after that.
Yeah, they're still 2-7 in the conference. So, but coming up, they host Rutgers. They're at Iowa. What do they got after that? They host Northwestern. They're at Maryland. They host Minnesota. So, very much an opportunity. I don't want to say that's an easy schedule because, obviously with Iowa being in there and they're tied for the top at the Big Ten with UCLA. So it's not like it's easy, but still, it's certainly an opportunity for them to right the ship and get some things figured out here in the month of April. So that'll be interesting to follow. The other team we have highlighted is USC. Took 2 of 3 at Indiana. They were down. They overcame a 12-3 deficit in Game 3. Burke. Ethan Hedges is having an incredible season for USC. He went 3 for 5 in that Game 3 with 5 RBIs. Hit his 10th home run of the season. He's certainly a mid-season Big Ten Player of the Year candidate.
And he closed out that game on Sunday too on the mound, like he's doing on both sides of the ball, which is fantastic. It's a Big Ten Player of the Year type resume he's putting together.
Yeah, and I always forget about it, the fact that he also closes games too. So
it's
pretty incredible. Who doesn't love two-way players?
Right.
Michigan beat Penn State. That's significant. Penn State prior to that point in time was looking pretty dang good in the Big Ten. They got a pair of 1-run wins on Saturday and Sunday. So we've talked about Tracy Smith and his success, and just it's hard to bet against that guy. It's hard to bet against any team that he's coaching. He always coaches them up and does well. We mentioned Iowa. They swept Minnesota 3-0. They remain tied with UCLA at the top of the Big Ten standings. They outscored the Gophers 36-13. So that offense just continues to roll. They played that series Thursday through Saturday. I can't remember if it was scheduled that way or if they adjusted because of the weather, but they held Cade Obermiller on Friday, so he pitched Game 2, struck out 11 in 6 shutout innings. He continues to have a really good year. Their DH, Reese Moore, is another midseason Player of the Year candidate, and they're at Northwestern this weekend. Speaking of Northwestern, they took 2 of 3 against Maryland, so that's 2 consecutive series wins for the Wildcats, which is significant in my opinion.
Yeah.
And despite losing 22-11, they lost to Maryland 22-11 on Sunday. Jack Lausch, who we talked about last week, hit a pair of home runs. And I had mentioned last week that it felt like he was on the cusp of breaking out. So to see him get those big hits, I think is pretty significant for Northwestern, whose offense overall is finding their way. And they're going to continue to be dangerous. So, again, keep an eye on the Wildcats.
Side note for you, in one of our inevitable phone conversations we'll have this week, we might need to prioritize one of us seeing Iowa again. I know you saw them early, like week 2, but just with how well they've been playing, like we might need to get in there and get another look quickly.
Well, here's a fun little conundrum to deal with. So they're at Northwestern, which is the closest Big Ten school to my home. I was supposed to go to Dallas. I may still go to Dallas to see Western Kentucky at DBU, but thunderstorms are supposed to hit the Dallas area Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and I have to fly home before Sunday. So I may have to adjust my plans. And if that's the case, I may just be in Evanston again, checking out Iowa and the Wildcats. So
yeah,
stay tuned. We'll see what happens there.
There are worse options.
A worse option, yeah. Like sitting at home and doing nothing.
Yeah.
That's the worst of options. All right, Burke, let's jump into our observations. As I mentioned before, you were at the Oregon-Ohio State series. Ohio State took that series 2 games out of 3. You know, like just when you think you have some things figured out, and it looks like Ohio State is a cellar dweller, they come out and they pull this out. Not that surprising to follow from afar. I mean, Ohio State's always competitive. Justin Hare is obviously a very good coaching fit for that program. But I could talk about it for the next hour or two, but I'd rather hear it from you, having seen that series for yourself.
Like you, it was a surprising outcome for me. Like I don't bet on college baseball, but if I did, I would have lost a lot of money on the outcome of that series. Ohio State was coming off getting swept by Iowa and Indiana, and then Oregon is a top 10 team, or they were coming in. What was fascinating to me, first, it was the best weekend of weather that we've had as in this area. So it was nice to sit out outside in the elements, sans long underwear for the first time all year. That was a plus. But one thing if you follow Big Ten in other sports, like football, there's a rivalry budding between Oregon and Ohio State, and that seemed to have bled over into the baseball field. It was those two teams didn't have a lot of love for one another, it turns out, and it resulted in a fun series to watch. A lot of emotions on both sides. On Friday night, it kind of started out how you would expect it to start out. Oregon under Grayson Grinsell was fantastic. He was fantastic. Went 7 shutout innings on Friday. Oregon hit 4 home runs and just cruised to a 7-0 victory. Ohio State only had like 4 or 5 hits that night, and offense hasn't been the issue for Ohio State. What's funny is I turned to the scout sitting next to me on Friday, and I was like, man, the sad part is Ohio State played pretty competitive tonight, and they threw the ball. They gave up 7 runs, 4 of them home runs, but they came into this series with a 10 ERA and a 2 WHIP. So I was like, they threw the ball pretty well tonight. They gave up the home runs with limited damage and no one on, but I just didn't see that pitching holding up for the rest of the weekend. And then they sweep a doubleheader on Saturday and win the series. So on Saturday, it was it was back and forth. It was come from behind on the first game. Ohio State got a big single from Matthew Graveline, who was really struggling. He's one of their top players. He went something like 0 for 12 with 9 Ks last weekend against Indiana. So he was really on the struggle bus, but he hit the ball hard. Got a single late in that game 1 on Saturday to kind of propel Ohio State to the lead. And then Hunter Shaw came in, a veteran left-hander, gave them 2 scoreless innings to kind of close out the game and set up a rubber match. And then in the rubber match, it was one of the more exciting games I've seen. Again, Oregon again, jumped out to an early lead on the strength of home runs. They hit a lot of bombs this weekend. it was a back and forth game, and then you enter in Blaine Wink. Blaine Wink was supposed to be the dude for Ohio State. He was really effective last year in a relief role. He was the guy that they would stack behind Landon Beidle sheets on Fridays, and he would go 3-4 innings and kind of let it air it out and close down the games. He had a really good year in the Cape, entered the season as one of the top prospects in the Big Ten. But he really struggled. He was battling some arm soreness, and then the results they weren't good on the field. He entered the weekend with like a 20 ERA. So he comes into the game with 2 runners on, and it's in the 5th inning, the end of the 5th inning, and we're like, we didn't really know what to expect from Blaine Wink, but he was fantastic. It was the best I have seen him. He was up to 98. Sitting consistently 95, 96, 97. Really good hard changeup, about 90 miles per hour with late dive. The slider is kind of the third pitch. It wasn't quite as sharp as the other 2, but it was as electric as I've seen out of Blaine Wink. So it was just good to see him rebound. And and then Tyler Petterini on the offensive side, who's been one of the Buckeyes' best hitters for the last 3 years. All he's done is hit. He hits a big 2-run bomb in the bottom of the 8th inning to put Ohio State up top, and then Blaine Wink continues to shove to close out the game. And there, again, it felt like a postseason atmosphere. So, and this was Coach Hare's first Big Ten series at home. The stands were packed at Bill Davis Stadium. It was as many fans there as I've seen outside of a Michigan series at Bill Davis Stadium for Ohio State. So it was good to see all the people coming out supporting the team, and they really gave them something to root for in what has otherwise been a difficult spring for Ohio State. So Ohio State still has a lot of work to do, but when they play like this with intensity and an edge, and you combine that with their style of play of applying pressure on the defense through their athleticism, that's their strength. They can make it for some pretty uncomfortable games for some of these Big Ten programs that you expect to beat Ohio State, like Oregon. Now, on the other side, Oregon, I did see a lot of great stuff. Like I said, Grinsell was great. A couple relievers, Jason Wrights, he's a 6'11" righty who has some athleticism. He was up to 97. Cole Stokes is another hard-throwing righty. He was up to 97 for them. And then I really kind of fell in love with their sophomore shortstop, Maddox Maloney. He had 5 home runs on the weekend. Like, you just couldn't get that guy out. And he made some great plays defensively, ranging both sides. And one of the times he laid out and threw out Reggie Bussey, who's about as fast of a base runner that I've seen in the Big Ten this year. Laid out, got to his feet, and threw him out by a step. That was an impressive showing. So a guy that wasn't necessarily on my radar just because of a lack of exposure heading in, I came away super impressed with him as a top guy in the 2026 class.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. Like, we've talked about some of these sophomore shortstops in the Big Ten. Last week I talked about Ryan Kucherak of Northwestern, and Maryland's got Chris Akopian. I think you'll be seeing here in a couple of weeks. But you saw Maloney this weekend. I saw Rock Klowski for UCLA. Like next year's kind of talent base, and you just keep your fingers crossed that these guys are going to stay put here in the Big Ten. But this is like significant talent, like draft eligible talent. So it's been a lot of fun to follow. It was fun to hear your first recap of Maloney prior to this podcast when you just shared in our text thread, how much he impressed you. Because I know I shared with you how much Klowski impressed me. So that's pretty exciting moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I was sitting at the game and I'm laser focused on what's in front of me. I wasn't checking other scores or understanding what was going on around the country. So I'm just like, I'm watching this guy make plays and hit bombs all weekend. And I'm like, man, I could see this guy being the collegiate national team shortstop this summer. And then I thought, well, you got Klowski and that Justin LeBron guy is pretty good too. Yeah, and then you mentioned 3 or 4 more guys. So the competition is tough at shortstop, but that's a good thing. There's a deluge of talent at collegiate shortstops in the 2026 class, and it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, for sure.
So tell me about Rock Klowski, because as I'm tweeting about Maddox Maloney, people in my replies are saying, wait till you see Rock Klowski. And I'm like, well, my boy Patrick's there, so he's going to tell me all about it.
Yeah. He was like just a fun player to watch, and I saw him on the perfect day, right? So like, he takes the field, and you can just see that he carries himself with a different kind of aura, and the players react to him differently. When you've covered the game of baseball long enough, you know what I'm talking about. I can't necessarily describe it, but there's just something different about he and his persona and all that stuff he brings to the field. In the game I saw, it was early in the game. I think in the first inning he grounded into a double play, and then from that point forward, I know what it was. It was the second inning. They had runners on second and third and first base open, and they decided to intentionally walk Klowski. So you knew, like, Purdue head coach Greg Goff wanted nothing to do with him from at the very early parts of the game. And the very next hitter, which was Mulavi Levu, UCLA's sophomore first baseman, he hits a 2-run, I think, single. And it was part of a 5-run inning or something like that. So just that the fact that he now carries kind of like that presence where they know about him and they don't want him to beat you, even in the second inning of a ball game, I think that's pretty significant. Excuse me. His next at bat, he steps up, he rips a double down the third base line, steals third, scores again in that game, and then his third or fourth time to the plate, he ripped a 430-foot home run to left center field, and like you're just putting it kind of all together, this picture together, like, wow, this kid has it, And then his best play of the game, though, was in the ninth inning. Purdue actually just continued to chip back. It was a 13-12 win by UCLA, but it went to the very end, and Purdue had just gotten a 2-run single to bring that game to 13-11. They had runners on second and third with, 1 out, and Ebert Choi stepped up to the plate, who hit a 2-run double earlier in the game. He hits a ball hard into the hole in the 5-6 hole, like between third base and shortstop. And, immediately off the bat, you could tell, like, okay, they're not throwing out Choi, right?
Right.
So what does Klowski do? He goes and he dives, and, you can see this. I posted this on X. You can see the video. He goes and he dives, and he kind of slides on his knees, gathers the ball at third, and does this quick flip throw over to Roman Martin, UCLA's third baseman, who tags the runner who's trying to advance from second. The run does end up scoring, but they got the second out of the inning at third base, so that runner's erased, right? He would have been he represented the game tying run at third base, and it wasn't he didn't do anything wrong, advancing to third on that play based on where that ball was hit. You didn't think Klowski had a play at any base, but it's that creativity, that you see as a defender that really, really made him special in my mind. And it's just kind of like, it's one of those plays. It's just kind of like, if there's any doubt this kid can play shortstop, that doubt was instantly erased. And he made some nice plays. They made a couple double plays and showed a strong arm, showed good actions to both sides. But soft hands, really good transfer. That glove to ball transfer is so quick. And that allows everything else to play up defensively. Just soft hands and quick feet. So really impressed with Rock Klowski. I did a feature on him that hit the D1 baseball site this morning. We're recording on a Tuesday, so be sure you go check that out. And again, like Burke said, kind of keep his name in mind. He's going to be competing for collegiate national team spot this summer, I'm sure. And if not, I'm sure he'll be one of the top prospects in the Cape. But definitely a name to watch moving forward.
I'm glad that you pointed out a situational awareness play, because those are the things, that don't show up in the box scores, and you kind of have to be watching the game to pick up on those. And Maddox Maloney had one of those too, where he, it was a double play ball, didn't have a play at first, and backpicked the guy at third base. And it just, when I see those plays, because I don't see them as often at the D1 level as you do at, maybe a high school team or something like that. It's fun to see that style of play and getting outs at the next level. So that's fun to watch.
It was the most creative defensive play I'd seen since watching Robert Moore play at Arkansas. And Robert Moore was one of the most gifted defensive players I've ever seen play. And I don't know, I don't know if his bat's going to be good enough to get him to the big leagues, but his glove for certain would be.
So let me put you on the spot and ask you this question, because So I think we saw the two most talented teams in the Big Ten this past in terms of Oregon and UCLA. After watching Oregon on Friday, I was kind of wondering if they were an Omaha team, and then you see them. They lose 2 to Ohio State. They have no business really losing that season from a talent perspective, or that series from a talent perspective. And then you look back at their recent history, and they didn't sweep Rutgers. They got beat like 8-0 by the talented freshman pitcher there at Rutgers.
Landon Mack.
And then they didn't beat. I think they didn't sweep Minnesota the weekend before. Like, just you expect them to go in and take care of business, and winning the series is certainly doing that. But to get over that next hump and be considered, one of the final 8 teams, you really need to win all of those games you're supposed to win. So as I'm watching Oregon, I was wondering if offensively, I think they have as much firepower as any team I've seen this year. I didn't know if they had that pitching depth, so that might be a question for them. They need a few more guys to step up, and maybe one more starter and a few more bullpen arms. So, let's have that brief debate, like who's the better team in the Big Ten right now, because those are the two that are ranked, and I think UCLA jumped ahead of Oregon in our most recent ranking. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was super impressed with the UCLA offense, and for the history that they have, and kind of like people just assume they still run a West Coast offense where they're bunting and moving runners. They weren't doing any of that. Like their offense resembled what you see these days. And it actually reminded me a lot of Purdue's offense, because both these teams were just wearing the other pitching staffs down. They would just take so many pitches. And speaking of that pitching staff, Cody Delvecchio is their Friday guy. He has a 6.82 ERA as their Friday guy, and they win games because they put enough runs on the board. And Delvecchio goes deep enough into games that even if he's given up runs, he's hanging around. I saw Michael Barnett, have his worst start of the year on Saturday. And it's not that he was necessarily bad. It's just that Purdue ran up his pitch count mega early in that game and chased him. Barnett has a strikeout to walk ratio of 37-4 in 28 2/3 innings right now. And, I guess what I'm getting at, Burke, with this is just that, like, UCLA is not built. They do not have that dominant pitching staff like that we so frequently associate with the Bruins. It's not just this pitching and defense formula. Right now, they're winning because their offense. Like, they can score runs. They can absolutely wear you down. With guys like Klowski, and I mentioned Levu at the top of the lineup, and several other. Dean West is a fantastic table setter at the top of their lineup. Just does a lot of big things for them. And there's other guys from top to bottom. Like, it's really tough. So I don't know how sustainable UCLA's success is simply because of the pitching, and they completely like. Maybe I just saw Michael Barnett on his absolutely worst day. That's possible. Maybe Delvecchio is going to turn things around. And Landon Stump, their Sunday guy, has pitched pretty well. Not necessarily dominant, but good numbers across the board. Ian May was the guy transfer. I think he came from Cal. He came in on Saturday in relief at one point in time and really helped stabilize that game and gave UCLA some much needed innings. But, they brought in other guys too, like Luke Rodriguez is like this curveball specialist that was getting hit around a little bit by the Purdue hitters. And the one guy I didn't see who pitches midweeks, and I think he came in Friday, is a freshman by the name of Wyland Moss. Excuse me. And I just get the sense that UCLA is like, we're going to see him as their Friday starter next year and possibly at some point this year. That's just how good his stuff has been. Posting really good numbers, just lights out. And even some of Purdue's guys I talked to before Saturday's game had mentioned that, he's coming in throwing 94 to 96 with just ridiculous breaking stuff. So that I think is going to be fascinating to watch because he could be, as a freshman, their best pitcher.
I see that Justin Lee threw when you were there, but it was his second appearance of the week, and he kind of got shelled, didn't record an out, but he looks like he threw 2/3 of an inning on the Friday game with a strikeout. But I wish you could have seen him better because he was an intriguing arm for me on the Cape.
Yeah, I wrote down the notes on him. I can't remember what I had on him.
For
all
me,
the different things
like
that I write, the
92.
chicken scratches.
Yeah, for me it was like 92, 94 with like the makings of a hammer curveball. So, but it looks like the appearance you saw was probably more forgettable than noteworthy.
Yeah, I can't even remember if I wrote anything down on him, but yeah, it was. Yeah, I guess, and another kind of impression that I have, and this is kind of going away from the discussion, probably a discussion to have at another point in time. Based on what I've seen so far over the first month of the season, they need to address something from a pitching perspective. And I've even talked to coaches about this. They can do so much advanced scouting on pitchers now, where they can plan and they know what's coming. Like, it gives hitters so much of a greater advantage. And, despite the fact that pitchers are throwing harder now than they ever have, you also see a lot more walks and you see a lot more base runners. At least I do. And you're seeing a lot more big hits as a result, too. And at some point, in my opinion, they're going to have to expand that strike zone. And I see it at the big league level, too. And we're seeing it through the first less than a week of play here in the major leagues, just how balls are flying out of ballparks. At some point, I think they're going to have to make those adjustments. And to me, it's the strike zone. I think that's the easiest way to do it. I know there's some pushback on that, especially from like the umpires and their point of view and just how they've been trained that the strike zone, is over the plate, from just above the belt to the knees. That's the strike zone. But I think you're going to have to start expanding that a couple inches in each direction to give the pitchers a little bit of a advantage, at least back, because right now, it just feels like the game is very much favoring the hitters.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be opposed to that as long as it's consistent. Like what drives me crazy, and I even saw it a little bit this weekend in a pivotal game, is it's tight early, and then you expand the zone later in the high leverage innings, and that's really unfair to the hitters. Like, as lights out as Blaine Wink was, he was getting a couple calls that were, I think, might have been influenced by a crowd yelling, and where he was, according to TrackMan, he was getting a few inches on either side. When you're throwing 97, 98, that's not really fair to the hitters who have sat there for 25 innings throughout the weekend with one strike zone, and then when the game's on the line, you're giving 3 inches on either side. That's I'm old school. I'm pre-TrackMan, so it's like. And I was a catcher, so hey, show me what the zone is, and then if that's a strike on 3 inches outside, let's make it a strike all weekend long, both when I'm hitting and when I'm behind the plate. So I think that's what coaches and players want to see. As long as it's consistent, then I think you can expand a little bit and maybe help out these. Well, it doesn't help, Patrick, that the game you went to on Friday at Notre Dame, Florida State had like 12 home runs. I know they were kind of wind aided, but you're forcing people to throw it down the heart of the plate, and they're gonna punish it in college baseball.
Yeah, I mean, now between Minnesota and Kansas and Florida State, Notre Dame, Purdue, UCLA, I've seen a lot of home runs the past 3 weeks, and it's just kind of like, okay, like that to me is not the brand of baseball that I think is best for the sport. And maybe I'm wrong. I have not seen the zone expand as the game has progressed. I have seen a pretty consistent strike zone being called from beginning to end. And in my opinion, that's what allowed Purdue to come back in that game, because they too did not change their approach on Saturday. And they stuck with their plan to just wear down the opposing pitchers, wait for the right, pitches to hit, making those positive swing decisions. And that's something that Purdue and UCLA did really well.
Yeah. Well, I'm good. I'm
I want
glad
to
we both.
I want to jump back if I could to Jamie Arnold and Estevan Moreno, just because like Jamie Arnold, I found really interesting, and he only threw 4 2/3 innings, and I want to say he walked. Did he walk like 2 batters in the first, maybe even 3? And he has the stuff obviously to dodge. Like when he puts runners on, he can overcome that. But for as good as this stuff is, like you almost want to see him go out there and dominate a little more than what he has so far this season. And I may just be nitpicking, but when you start talking about a player that's the number 1 overall pick, and you and I mentioned this last week when it comes to top picks, we're not handing out the money, right? We're not
Right.
writing the checks. We're not making those decisions. But I will say the talent is, you can't ignore it. I mean, he's a left-hander from lower slot that is just so athletic, so repeatable, so easy, and just pumps. Well, I mean, he was sitting 92 to 94 for 4 2/3 inning, and that didn't waver. He touched, I want to say 90. What was he touched 96 in the game I saw, and touched 95 a couple of times in the first inning. But still was hitting 94s, throughout his start. But it's, you've heard about it, right? It's the slider. It's this 85 to 86 mile per hour pitch that just like is not fair, and it just, it's a traditional slider that I would use. I've heard some people call it a sweeper or whatever. I'm not a big fan of the sweeper terminology anyway, but this thing has some ridiculous horizontal break, and it's just unfair. And when he gets ahead in the count, and he breaks out that pitch, to both right and left-handed hitters, it's just not fair. And he's developing a splitter that is different from his changeup, where his changeup, stays away. It obviously fades away from right-handed hitters, whereas his splitter breaks like straight down, but it stays on the arm side of the plate. He does a really good job. And the splitter he threw, I think, was 88 miles per hour. The changeups he threw were right around 87 miles per hour. So he has 3 pitches that are, basically the slider at 85 to 86, the changeup at 87, the splitter at 88, and then his fastball 92 to 96. Like, that's just flat out nasty, and he's putting the ball when he's at his best where he wants. Now, it's not consistent command or control. And he's an emotional young man. He's showing visible like frustration and excitement, from pitch to pitch, and I think at some point he's going to have to contain that a little bit, not too much, because you obviously want your players to be emotionally excited and get that adrenaline rush when they need to. But I do think it'll be fascinating as the season progresses, because it seemed like last week, like everybody suddenly had Jamie Arnold as like the favorite to go number 1 in the draft, and like just like it kind of changed their draft boards. I know like Jace LaViolette down at Texas A&M hasn't been swinging the bat very well, so he kind of dropped. But yeah, it was a fun look. And then Moreno, Notre Dame shortstop. I mean, I've talked about him before. Kind of similar to what I shared with Rock Klowski. Like, he's a good defender. He's a big, strong kid, just like Klowski, but he's still very agile on his feet, has a strong arm. And he crushed this 3-run home run. Just absolutely did not miss. There's some swing and miss with the profile. He's definitely striking out more than he should. But I was happy to see that, because he didn't. I think he went hitless when I saw him the opening or the second weekend of the year down at Stetson. So it was really nice to see him get into one, because he's a special game-changing talent.
Yeah, and you texted me that you were excited to kind of see him on a good weekend after seeing him not so good in week 2. So that was exciting to see.
Yeah, you cut down that chase, the swing, like how much he swings and miss, and it's first round talent in my opinion. But obviously that's going to be the deciding factor of him where he goes. Basically, like, do you take a second round? Do you spend a second round pick on that, or does he go more like 4th, 5th, 6th round? But I think just that athleticism and the power potential and just what he can do on a baseball field, I think it's just, to me, too good to pass up.
Yeah. Well, Patrick, for me, I'm just glad that you and I both got to the ballpark and saw some good baseball and decent weather for once. And it looks like that was our 1 week reprieve, and now we're back to chasing weather and weather impacting which games we're going to see. So that takes us to our weekend plans, which you already kind of indicated. You don't know what you're going to do. And I'm kind of in the same boat. I got a few options that I'm toying around with, and I'm watching the radar and seeing which ones are appealing. I might be doing a combo of several locations and maybe 2 or 3 different states. So those are always fun, but they're tiring. But we'll sleep in July.
Yeah. Or some other time. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't know what I'm doing. I'm currently scheduled to go to Dallas for DBU, Western Kentucky, like 2 of the top teams in Conference USA, which I'm really excited about. But I don't know if that's going to happen. So we'll see. And just for the record, Burke, like Saturday was not the greatest weather. I mean, I sat through rain that entire game. It was not heavy enough to delay the game at all, but it was consistent and persistent enough to be pretty dang annoying. So I could do without that.
Well, I didn't mean to speak for you prematurely then. I was just when it's so beautiful in God's country of Columbus, Ohio, like I just assumed it was good for everyone in the Midwest.
It might as well be nice everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, you want to wrap this
up? Any other observations you want to share, Burke?
No. I mean, I mentioned it. Oregon's really good, man. Like Mason Novell, he's their leadoff hitter. He hit a ball about as far as any ball I've seen at Bill Davis Stadium. TrackMan said it went 445 feet. I wish I would have got the exit velo on it because, you know, he sat and admired it, and that kind of started the jawing back and forth. And hey, I don't blame him for admiring it because I admired it too. It was a shot. Anson Arrows is another guy. He's switch hitting. They have like 3 catchers on their team that they use in their everyday lineup. Anson Arrows is a catcher by trade, but he plays left field and DHs. He homered in all 3 games. Jacob Walsh, their first baseman, is their all-time leader in home runs at Oregon. He had a home run this weekend. Like, it's real power that they have on that team. You just like I mentioned, you want to see them take care of business against the teams they're supposed to if they're gonna make a run and be a team that makes it to that hosts a regional, makes it to a super, and makes a run in Omaha. So, but you know, this was a minor hiccup, and I don't foresee the Ducks dropping off. I think they're going to continue to be one of the best teams in the Big Ten this year.
I do find it interesting. We've talked about the top teams of the Big Ten, and you mentioned, you asked the question as if I thought, UCLA could sustain that success. You look at those top 3 teams, Iowa, UCLA, Oregon, they're all putting up pretty ridiculous offensive numbers to this point in the season. So it's definitely changed, like we'll see how the pitching shakes out. I think ultimately that is what's going to determine it. And at this point in time, it might be Iowa that has the best staff out there. So we'll see.
Yeah, it could be.
So I think that's enough for this week. So what are we looking at? We're just a little over 40 minutes here today, Burke. So job well done as always. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to Big Baseball and Beyond, a D1 baseball podcast. And we'll see you again next week.